Managing 1,500 properties is not just a huge milestone, but looking back, it's been a crash course in the realities of property management in California. In this video, I'm going to share the absolute most valuable lessons I've learned, the uniqueness of the rental market and how that's influenced my journey along the way, and how to turn challenges into opportunities. Learning some of these lessons earlier can save you time, money, and most importantly, headache. So let's dive in. Lesson number one is tenant screening is way too complicated. So most people make it way too complex. And I was one of those people, starting out as a property manager, you're like, oh, we have the best tenant screening criteria. We call their rental references and we stop by their place of employment and we drive by their property that they currently live at. There's some great hacks and tips that a lot of property managers and rental owners have picked up over the years of how to screen good tenants. So a lot of these traditional methods, while great, if we could actually get good information, just take too long, and all the while your property's sitting vacant, not making any money. So how do these REIT-owned apartment buildings and these private equity-owned big apartment, hundreds of units, how do they approve you in 30 seconds if you walk in? Well, they know the risk assessment. They know what credit score generally means they'll pay, or what debt to income ratio generally means that they will pay, or what to look for in an application, how to detect signs of fraud, how to cross-reference the address on the license with the address on the credit report, or the address on the rental application with the addresses on the credit report, what not to approve, like open bankruptcies, or if there's a housing-related judgment. So there's all these tips and tricks, but the most effective ones don't require extra time. That's something I learned early on was, tenants, properties would sit vacant because we're holding out for this rental reference or we're holding out for this employment verification. So a good tenant will generally meet your screening criteria. So they'll have the credit score that you're looking for. They'll have the debt to income ratio you're looking for. You'll have to decide how many acceptable number of late payments in the last 12 months you'll allow. Because some people won't pay their credit card on time, but they'll pay their rent on time every time. And then when you pile on top these new laws that just passed around tenant screening, like AB 2493, all these new laws that are on the books that require you to process applications in a certain way. We'll put a link to one of the videos down in the description so you can check that one out. It doesn't have to be complicated. Pick a minimum FICO score, have a minimum income ratio. Now, definitely still check their income. Make sure they provide pay stubs or bank records or, last year's tax return. Some of the traditional ways that I was taught when I was coming up years ago just don't work anymore. They're not effective and they're not necessary to picking a great tenant. Number two is property management. The industry traditionally sucks, mainly because it was an impossible task to begin with. Let me explain. Property managers require competing competencies. So we need someone that's very detail oriented, but then we also need someone that's very good with people. It's this industry where it's almost impossible to find someone that's very good at everything in property management. The traditional portfolio manager is that one person, they're responsible for everything at the property. The bad part about that is they're probably great at a few things, mediocre at a number of things, and bad at a number of things. It requires so many different types of skills. The better way we found is by setting up companies in a departmental model where there's specialists at each role. There's an application screening specialist, property onboarding, maintenance coordinators, leasing managers. Now, one of the downsides to the specialist model is sometimes an owner will have to talk to multiple people, and that can be a more challenging experience. But the way around that is just better, robust communication and really strong note-taking and transparency behind the scenes. And we found departmental models where everyone's a specialist in something yields better results for the client. All right, lesson number three, plumbing is 80% of the game. If I could only focus on one thing, there's a great book, by the way, called The One Thing by Gary Keller. Highly recommend it. 80% of your problems are gonna be the hot water heater, a leaking valve, leaking plumbing under the sink, clogged pipe, pressure. What we recommend for new owners is pay an actual good plumber to go through and make full assessment of your house and make recommendations. All these plumbing things that a good plumber can do up front is gonna save you a ton of headache on the back end. Lesson number four is only showing rent-ready homes. Now this one was a tough one for me, and before you throw tomatoes or turn the channel and say, as soon as I notice my tenant leaves, that's when I start showing the property. Hey, do whatever works for you. I'm just sharing my experience. It was a hard one for me because it's been so ingrained in traditional property management where as soon as the tenant gives notice, you put that property on the market and you start, showing the property while the tenant lives there. What we ended up finding was this sets up a very bad experience like 50% of the time for the result the owner gets with the rent, the move-in experience for the new tenant, and potentially even the move-out experience for the existing tenant. And here's why. First off, when you show a property that's occupied, it doesn't show as well as if it's vacant, clean, ready to be moved in. You kind of walk through and it kind of stinks, it's kind of dingy. The amount you're gonna get for the rental is less because it doesn't show as well. Now, Steve, yes, there are exceptions. The tenant keeps it beautifully clean every once in a while. It can work, but it still doesn't get you over the other hurdles we'll talk about in a second. So let's say the tenant rents it at a price you're happy with, great. Now, when they go to move in, there's gonna be some issues because they're gonna assume that the property is brand new. It was built in the 70s. Of course, there's some scratches there, and of course, there's some dings there. And well, they didn't see those things at move-in. They just assumed you were going to paint top to bottom and that the countertops would have no scratches and that the inside of the oven would come cleaner and all these things. So when you show an occupied property, they assume it's gonna be made brand new. But when you show a vacant rent-ready home, they know that this is the condition you get the property in. You know, we might do a spiff clean or a touch-up clean before they move in, but this place is ready for you. So it cuts way down on move-in issues after a tenant moves in. Another thing that can come up is, what if the exiting tenant gets delayed? Something happens with their new house, can't move out in time, or their moving truck gets delayed. Now you have a promise to rent to this tenant before this tenant actually is able to leave, and now you've got yourself into a pickle. So for all those reasons, it's much more consistent, much more better result to get a higher rent, to get a better move-in process, to reduce headache and hassle for you and your tenants. If you just let the tenant move out, fix it up quickly, and then you put it on the market, it's something I highly recommend. So lesson number 5 is most people don't actually understand the different ways real estate pays. A common thing that we'll come across in property management is an owner will say, oh, I can't fix that, or there's too many repairs, I'm losing money on this property, I'm just gonna sell it. And then when I hear that, I like to dig in a little bit and say, okay, well, tell me a little bit about the performance of the property. Like, what's your cash flow? What's your mortgage? And oftentimes they'll say like, oh, I'm just breaking even. And I'm like, you're breaking even? Congratulations. You're in an appreciation market, one of the top appreciation markets in the country, and you're breaking even? That's great. Let me walk you through the 4 ways that real estate pays. So number 1 is cash flow. So you're breaking even on cash flow. Let's say you're even losing a couple $100s a month. Okay, very common scenario. That's where most people's brain shuts off. That's when they stop thinking about it. I'm losing a couple $100 a month or whatever it is. Okay. The second way is appreciation. Places in the Midwest, property might go up $7,000 in 7 years. But in Southern California, traditionally it's been 6% appreciation. So 6% on $1 million, that's 60 grand. Some years it's went up 20%, some years it's went up 10%, some years it went down. But overall, 6% appreciation is a really healthy return every year that is coming in the form of equity. Now, the third way real estate pays is amortization. So the tenant is paying the rent, and that's going to your mortgage, and a certain part of the mortgage every month goes to paying off the debt. So if you look at your statement, let's say it's a $3,000 mortgage payment, maybe $1,200 is going towards interest and $1,800 is going towards principal, let's say. And so that $1,800 is similar, it's like cash flow. Now, it's not money you actually get, but it's paying down a debt you owe to the bank. If you're, let's say, $200 negative a month, after you factor in amortization, the tenant's paying off $1,800 you owe every month. So really you're like positive $1,600. And then the fourth way real estate pays is tax savings. So depreciation is the biggest one. You can depreciate the house or the building over 27.5 years. So you take the value of your property and minus the value of the land. So let's say, it's $1 million. So $1 million divided by 27.5 years is about $36,000 a year that you get to write off of your income tax. Now check with your CPA, everyone's tax situation is a little bit different, but that's a huge tax savings. $36,000 in basically a phantom expense that gets to be written off of your income tax. And that's just the beginning. You get to write off the repairs you make, you get to write off property management fees, you get to write off travel to and from your property, all sorts of tax breaks that most people don't think of. After-tax cash flow is often way better than most people realize. And then the bonus way that real estate pays would be leverage. So you only put 20% down and you got a mortgage for 80%, right? And if you have an equity position, you can take a home equity line of credit. So when you bought the property, you only put 20% down and you got a mortgage for 80%. But when you get appreciation or depreciation, all those things, benefits we talked about, that's based on the whole 100%. You only put 20% down, but you get to earn the 6% appreciation on the whole value. All right, here's one more bonus tip around technology. Self-access showing lockboxes get properties rented way faster, and it's a win-win. Let me explain. So basically how it works is there's like a realtor style lockbox, if you're familiar with what realtor lockboxes look like. Put it on the door, and with some of these systems people offer, like we use Tenant, it has a secure access way of asking questions when someone's interested. They have to upload a photo ID, and then they get a one-time secure access code that is only good for 30 minutes. Then it confirms when they lock it up. It gives them reminders to keep all the doors shut, shut the blinds, etc. And then it asks for feedback when they leave. The great thing about that is the property can now be shown from 8 to 8. You can set any showing hours you want, and it's a much better viewing experience. Today's on-demand world, tenants love this. They can securely see the property. Now we can still do in-person showings, and we still do, and that's great. But it's just this extra tool in the toolbox that gets properties way quicker, improves the experience when someone's looking at a property. They can just go look at it with their loved one. They can bring a measuring tape and measure, really picture if this is where they want to live, versus a leasing agent being like, here's the kitchen, here's the bathroom, pointing out things that people don't need to be pointed out. Highly recommend checking some of those systems out. Managing over 1,500 rental properties has taught me a ton, and hopefully some of these lessons will help you. If you're in Southern California and looking for a property manager to handle some of the heavy lifting, we'd love to talk to you and see how we can help. Whether you have 1 property or 10, we've got you covered. Schedule a call today and we'll see how we can make owning rental property easier for you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.